This happened in the fall of 2014. I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan, at Camp Hansen. I had a roommate at the time that slept on a futon while I slept in the government-issued bed. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke up with sleep paralysis. This had never happened to me before. I was frozen on my side, staring at my roommate sleeping on the futon. Standing just above him was a black figure with his back to me, just staring down at him. For 10 minutes, I could not move or say anything. I just lied there in fear. Once I was able to move, the figure disappeared in front of my eyes. I immediately turned on a movie, terrified of what I had just seen. A couple of nights later, the same thing happened. I was on my side, staring at my roommate, unable to move, with the same figure staring down at my roommate. About 10 minutes go by, and I'm able to move and yell out, "What the fuck?" Instead of disappearing, the thing turns toward me. A tall black figure with a deathly white face and black or dark red eyes and mouth staring at me. It stands there for a few seconds and then disappears. After getting myself together, I stand up and search the room. I find nothing. I go to the sink, splash water on my face, and then go back to bed to put a movie on my laptop. As I lay back down, I look up from my screen to see the figure standing closer to my bed staring at me. I scream, and it disappears. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I'm exhausted. I try to take a nap in the afternoon with all my lights on, terrified about what I had witnessed. I wake up to have sleep paralysis again. This time, I watch my blanket slide off my leg and feel a tight grip on my knee. I feel this grip for about a minute before it lets go. I later found out that one of the newer Marines had been practicing lucid dreaming a couple rooms down from mine the first night I saw the figure. He said, with no mention from me about the incident, while he was practicing lucid dreaming, he woke up and he stood up from his bed and went to his sink. And when he looked up at the mirror, another face was looking back at him, a pale white face with black holes where the eyes and mouth should be. Fuck that guy. Hey guys, I just had an encounter that I'd like to talk about. I was out for a drive this evening through some back roads outside my small urban town. It was about 10:30 or 11 p.m. I've driven these roads dozens of times before, and I've never had an issue. Until tonight, that is. And just as a preface, there are little to no houses along these specific roads, and there's never traffic, so it's very isolated. So, I'm cruising around the twisty roads, enjoying myself and kind of in my zone, when I come over the crest of a right turn that goes up a hill, which then sweeps down into a flat left turn, which has a guardrail along the right side of the road. As I crest the hill, I was going fairly slow, 40 or 50 miles per hour, as there are often deer and possums in the area. I notice a moving figure along the guardrail. I begin to slow some more, as I figure it's a deer and don't want to hit it. But as I get closer, I realize it's not a deer. It looks like a man. At this point, I'm barely moving, just creeping forward as I get closer, and I realize it is a man, who's crouched down in a sort of a squat, and he's now turned around to look at me. In my headlights, the first things I notice are, he's not wearing any clothes, except for a pair of tidy whities, or maybe an adult diaper. His eyes are oddly large for an adult man, and completely brown or black, and his skin is ghostly white. As I approach, I turn my brights on, and he didn't even flinch. By now, I've completely stopped and started to reach down to get my phone, as I wanted to take a video. This was a huge mistake. I turned away for a split second to grab my phone from the passenger seat, and as I'm starting to look down, he starts sprinting. He's running directly toward me. Fuck. He gets up to my window and starts screaming. Not just like a man yelling, but like all the rage he's ever felt in his life is coming out at this moment, and it's directed at me. He starts pounding on my window with his fists, all the while absolutely screaming his head off. This lasts for about 3 seconds before I throw it in first gear and peel out. As I'm accelerating, first gear in my car takes me to 40 miles per hour. I look at my rear view and I realize that he's keeping up with me. It's not until I get in second and then third, and I take it up to around 80 miles per hour, that I can no longer see him. He was running at inhuman speeds, trying to keep up. I flew the rest of the way home, afraid to stop or look in my mirrors. I got into the driveway, ran inside, and typed this up. I have no idea what I encountered, but I did, and I hated every second of it. I'll be finding other routes to take when I take nighttime drives in the future, just to be sure that I never meet him again. Myself and 2 friends, we'll call them Sid and Ned, were wandering around one night in the dead of winter. This takes place a bit past the end of my dad's dead-end road. The road ends and tapers off into a dirt and grass pathway that leads all the way to a creek bank that used to have a bridge running over it. The bridge was long gone, and we loved exploring the creek. The 3 of us were wading along, chilly water up to our ankles. Thank God for waterproof boots. It has steep banks on either side, ones you have to be very careful to get up or down. We're wandering along in almost total darkness, because of course we're badass teenagers and we don't need no light. I wish we had one. Sid mentions she hears something moving, and Ned and I quiet down and listen, and sure enough, something was snapping the brittle twigs up the embankment in front of us. If you grew up knowing what deer or other animals sound like moving through the undergrowth, you'll be able to recognize it. This was different. This was wrong. We were able to hear what sounded like something bipedal moving across the bank. The thudding of the footfalls was frightening as hell, because it sounded like someone in heavy boots, intentionally stomping with every step. Sid and Ned, the brave creek wanderers they were, hid behind me, as though I would be able to do anything against whatever it was out there. Looking back on it, I'm kind of a little mad. Anyway, we were standing there, stock still, in ankle-deep freezing water, for what felt like hours, just listening to this thing moving around. It couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 minutes, and we listened to the progression from our far right to right in front of us when my friends decided to use me as a meat shield, and then off to our left. Eventually, after the noise tapered off, we scurried back up our side of the embankment to head towards home. As we made our way down the small slope onto the trail, which ran between 2 large open fields, we heard a piercing shriek that sounded inhuman. Nothing like I had ever heard before in those woods. It was like the scream of a cougar, mixed with the chattering of some angry riled-up bird. There are no cougars, at least not in northwest Tennessee. We froze for a moment to figure out where the sound was coming from, and we heard that sound of heavy stomping again, this time moving very fast. In the dull moonlight, we see in the field to our right this weird thing. I don't know how to describe it. It looked like a person, but it was wrong. The stance it had, and the noises it was making. It was hard to see due to the darkness. It looked like a tall, hunched-over bald person with abnormally long arms. It really did sound like the aliens from the movie Signs. The weird clicking noises they made, only louder and more distorted like an old VHS tape. It almost made me sick, and I remember feeling utterly helpless and terrified, especially since signs freaked me the fuck out, and it was just a movie. Needless to say, all three of us booked it back to my house. I'm not sure if either of my friends paused to look back and see if it was following us, but I sure as hell didn't. I kept my eyes locked on home. We never really talked about it after that night. Both of my friends saw and heard it, supposedly anyway, so I don't think it was my imagination. Something was out there with us that night, but I definitely wasn't about to poke my nose around and try to find out what. It took me a while to go back to the creek. I never again did visit at night though. During the day, it felt fine. I loved it. It was teeming with life and energy. I remember hearing odd screams from down that way every so often after that, but I tried to chalk it up to animals fighting, even if deep down, I knew it was probably something a little more sinister. I was driving to pick up my friend from the airport around 10 at night. His girlfriend was also with me, and she wanted to see him as soon as possible. We were going down some dark, super lonely back road. I'd never been that way before, but I was following good old Apple Maps. Eventually, we came up alongside a train that was matched with our speed, so we couldn't see out past it on the right side of the car. After a couple of minutes of that, we came upon a train yard on our left. A very spooky, very generic horror movie train yard. Nothing crazy yet, except for the fact that it went on and on. We probably spent 10 minutes driving at 45 miles an hour down a dark back road with a train yard on our left and a train on our right. Eventually, we made it back into society and picked up my friend from the airport. We told him all about the spooky train yard and train, and were excited to drive back and show him just how much it was like a generic horror film. We drove back down the same road. It wasn't there. We never passed the train yard. There were no trains on the tracks. My friend's girlfriend and I freaked out. We both swore up and down that we drove beside the train yard for a long time. Roughly around 1940, my grandmother was riding a horse with her uncle, heading to another village. They were riding in a rural wooded area when a rabbit crossed their path. The horse panicked and stood up on its hind legs. The rabbit looked at them and then grinned and giggled something they couldn't understand because the horse was making so much noise. He finally calmed down after the rabbit continued on its path. My grandmother was an only child of a priest, and she had always told this story as the time she met the devil. There's a similar thing that happened to a grandfather of a close friend. He was in the woods and saw a young goat, so he wanted to take it since it looked lost, and he didn't think it could survive a long time on its own. The moment he took it in his arms, he said something cute to the little goat, and it looked up at him and repeated the sentence in a mocking, sarcastic voice. Both happened in Macedonia. Does anyone have any idea what they are?